Hi everyone, I am back with another refinishing video. This time we are working on the step table that I got from Goodwill. It was only $8, so obviously it had to come home with me. I started by removing that inlay. I think the previous owners had stapled it in and it popped out really easily. I noticed that this top portion was loose, so I decided to remove it because it'd be easier to sand if it was off and then I could re-glue it. While I was re-gluing this loose dowel here, the wood actually cracked when I put it back in. And I didn't have any clamps, so I did that and it worked really well. I started sanding with 60 grit sandpaper on my orbital sander. I used that on every surface that I could before I had to switch over to hand sanding because there was a lot on this that had to be hand sanded and it took a very long time to do. But after it was all sanded and ready to be stained, it looked pretty cool. To prep for staining, I sanded it by hand with 120 grit sandpaper on every surface. To stain this piece, I used 3 different colors of Minwax stain. On the top surfaces, I used English Chestnut and I wiped that on with a rag. After that first application of English Chestnut, I switched over to Golden Oak because the English Chestnut tends to be very red and cold looking and the Golden Oak warms it up. On the sides and legs I used Dark Walnut and I used a wiping cloth to wipe that on, but also a foam brush to get into some of those spaces. This is after the first round of stain. The next day I came back and sanded it down with 220 grit sandpaper, wiped it off with a tack cloth, and I decided to put one more layer of Golden Oak over that English Chestnut because it was looking a little bit too cold. And then another layer of Dark Walnut on the legs and sides. To reattach the top to the bottom, I used Tight Bond wood glue. I used a damp cloth to wipe away any of the glue squeeze out and actual clamps to hold it together. I left all of that to dry for a couple days and came back to start putting the polyurethane on it. I used Minwax polyurethane in satin, and this is when things started to kind of go downhill. I noticed as I was applying the polyurethane that it didn't feel like it was applying right. It looked fine, wet, but this is what it looked like dry after that first coat. Kind of weird. I sanded it down with 220 grit and I wiped it off with a tack cloth. And then I applied the second coat and I noticed again while I was applying the second coat that it felt like the polyurethane was almost fighting me in a way. It didn't apply as smoothly and I noticed that there were more bubbles in it than normal. And it was after this second coat that things really started to go wrong. So something fell on it and scuffed it. I brought it inside to fix all those problems. I just touched them up with a little bit of stain, wiped the stain off, and then let it dry. And I came back and put another coat of polyurethane on it, and it looked like this the next morning. As you can see, it did not go well. So I brought it over to my mom and dad's house to work on it there because my mom wanted to take a look at it too. And we decided to sand down the polyurethane and try it again, so that's what I started to do. And things got even weirder with it from there. There was this weird film over the finish that you couldn't see when it was wet, and as it started to dry it reappeared. And I could not figure out why it was doing that, so I decided to just keep sanding it. and sanding, and sanding, and steel wool. And I was starting to get a little bit annoyed, so I whipped it out with the tack cloth and I put another coat of polyurethane on it, and it looked fine while it was wet. And when I saw it dry the next morning, I thought it looked mostly fine, and then I started to look at it again. So from this angle, it looks normal. Still looks normal. But from certain angles, you can see that the finish has this weird, like, milky sheen to it. Here's a better representation of that. I couldn't figure out why it had done that, so I wiped it down with some Old English, and that definitely helped. You could still sort of see that sheen, but the Old English toned it down a bit. At this point, I didn't think there's anything else that I could do, so I moved on to that inlay. To clean that up, I just used steel wool to get some of the grime and residue off. There was candle wax on it, things like that. And I reattached it with these L brackets. And after that, I called it good. I'll be totally honest, I'm not happy with how it turned out. The thing with the finish really bothers me. I wish I knew what happened. My best guess is that the polyurethane just wasn't good anymore. But all in all, it looks decent. I like the colors. I like the way the table looks as a shape, but I'm not happy with how it looks finished. Either way, even though it was a little frustrating, it was fun to work on. I'm glad that it's done. It looks cute in our apartment, and thank you for watching.